Welcome to the Type 051 Luda-Class Brigade Destroyer Sub Brief, Ship Brief. This is going to be the beginning of our journey through the PLAN warships. We're starting with the Type 051 Luda, and we'll be systematically walking through everything all the way up to a Type 055, which is their most modern destroyer in the fleet. Let's get started. All right, we're going to begin in 1960. This is where the Soviets and the Chinese were working together in a Sino-Soviet relationship with nuclear weapons and military equipment because they had similar, communistic workers' beliefs. But fractions in that system soon became apparent as Maoism rose and Marxism caused a division between the two countries. So in the beginning, though, in 1960, when relations were good, China was going to build a new destroyer based on a Soviet destroyer from 1951 called the Nostroshimi. A very important note here is the Nostroshimi has been built again in 1991, and that is shares the same name, but is not the one we're talking about today. This is the Nostroshimi from 1951. But in 1964, like I said, the Sino-Soviet split occurred officially. That's when they formally separated. And all the technical advisors from Russia were recalled back to Russia, or Soviet Union back then. And the project was temporarily halted for a few months, this new destroyer, this Luda-Class, until 1965, when China said, fine, we will just push forward using the equipment the Russians left behind, which was key, and the scientists and engineers that they had in China. And so they began what was to become known as reverse engineering. And the Chinese have become very good at this out of sheer desperation. They needed to. In the beginning, it was the only way they were going to get modern technical military equipment is by taking the military equipment left behind by the Soviets in the 1950s and early 60s and taking it apart. See if they could make their own version of it. And that's what they began doing with the Luda-Class. They continued working on it using the designs that they had from the Nostroshimi and trying to make their own version of it. One of these is a weapon called the HY-1. This is the first ship-borne anti-ship missile, and it is derived from the Soviet Styx missile, also known as the P-15 Termite. They also copied the rocket bomb unit, and they called it the FQF 2500 rocket launcher. That is basically a depth charge. And the ranges are essentially half of what that number is. So if you see FQF 2500, the range is 1,200 meters, approximately half. In the end, what the Chinese built was something more akin to the Kotlin class than the Nostroshimi class. And the Kotlin class is what replaced the Nostroshimi class in the Soviet Union. So overall, they did a pretty good job. They took the Nostroshimi and improved it and ended up to be very close to what the Soviets actually built. So these are built in the shipyards Luda, which is now known as Dalian, the Honghao, and which is near Shanghai, and the Yangzhou down near Hong Kong. It's not in Hong Kong, by the way. It's just close to Hong Kong. These are the three shipyards that are going to be building 17 hulls, 17 different ones. So the Dalian shipyard was originally named Luda, and the name of the ship class is named after the shipyard in which the first one was built. That's how we get the name. Now, there are going to be 6 different configurations on these 17 ships. We're going to go over all 6 of them. I've formatted this in a way to make it easy to understand, but we'll go slow, and feel free to pause if you need to. These were commissioned from 1971 to 1991. You may read sources saying that they were built from 1970 to 1990. Technically, that's true because they laid the keels down the year before. All right, the Luda-Class. What are we talking about? This is the base design that we're going to go and make 5 additional variants for. This is variant 1, the original design. 3,600 tons, 132 meters long, almost 13 meters wide. Can do 13 knots, which in 1970s, pretty good. That's the expectation for modern warships in the United States Navy and NATO navies. So they're able to would their first modern destroyer keep up with peer navies. It has a range of 3,000 miles if it doesn't do a flank bell the whole time. Has a crew of 280 people, which is a lot of sailors. 45 of these are officers, by the way. But that's the way these systems were back then. There was not a lot of automation. Everything had to be done by hand, and therefore there were a lot of hands on board. It's powered by 2 steam turbine engines, and these will end up being a huge liability. This is literally, a boiler making steam, pushing a turbine. Takes forever to start. Very old school. And those turn 2 shafts. It will have a Pegasus and a Timar sonar that's active and passive. And again, there's going to be multiple versions of those coming up. It does have, and this is the main weapon. If you look at midships, you can see these triple launchers. These shoot the HI-1 anti-ship missile. There's 3 in the forward and 3 in the aft. They cannot reload these while underway. Once they shoot them, they have to pull back in to reload. For defensive purposes and some surface fire, they have the 130 millimeter dual purpose cannons. They can raise these cannons to a very high angle to shoot at incoming, low flying aircraft and even some missiles. They also have two twin 37 millimeter anti-air guns and 6 torpedo tubes. Those are in triplet launchers, port and starboard. And then, of course, the FQF rocket launchers there are on the bow. All right, here's the HI-1 Silkworm missile, NATO designation CSS, so it's China surface-to-surface C2 missile. It has a solid booster motor to get it started. This is a Soviet design. This is essentially, like I said, the SSN-2 missile from the Soviet Union. It's just literally the Chinese copy of it. And they did a 1-for-1 match. They literally copied the missile. So it has the same liquid sustainer motor. It's subsonic. Has a 454-pound hollow core warhead. So imagine a basketball, because that's about the size of it. That's hollow inside. And whenever it explodes inward, which then bounces off itself and explodes back outwards again. And designed to tear a ship apart. It has a range of 85 kilometers max range. There was a modification that was done to this missile during the life of the Luda that extended the range to 110 kilometers. Some sources say 160 kilometers. There's a lot of uncertainty about the upgraded missile, but we call the upgraded missile the HY-2. Sometimes you'll see the HY-1 and HY-2 discussed as if it's the same missile, because it is essentially the same missile, just the second one has a little bit longer range. And these missiles are still used today by North Korea. They're still in service. Here's the twin 130 millimeter dual purpose guns. Fires 12 rounds per minute per barrel. Has 200 round magazine for each gun. And the turret magazine is 150 rounds. Has a ballistic range of 24 kilometers and can be both radar and optically aimed. So pretty capable gun for its time. You wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of these rounds coming at you every couple seconds. The twin 37 millimeter guns, I have the land variant here of the Chinese gun that was used on the ship. It's the best photo I could find for it to give you an idea. These are manually aimed. These literally have an operator or crew member aiming these in the direction that they want to shoot something down. Very World War II style, unlike the radar-guided main guns. And that picture on the right there, you have a great view of the FQF 2500 ASW rocket bombs. You can see one is raised and one is lowered, and those pivot 360 degrees. Obviously, they can't shoot back towards the turret, but they pivot around and can shoot in any direction. And that is the base Luda right there. Now we're going to begin changing her a little bit. The first one comes in 1980. Only 9 years after the first one's commissioned, they begin improving. And this is something that's important to understand, because this will be a consistent thing throughout all these PLAN ships as we go forward. China does not wait to design a new ship before it makes improvements. So we will often talk about a class of ship, and then we'll have lots of different variants of that ship. And this is where this begins. So this one is the Type 051 Delta, also called the Batch 2. So you may see it as either way. This applied to hulls 8 through 15, so pretty much the second half. Remember, they only made 17 of these. The second half of these were converted into Batch 2. And what that was is they installed improved electronics, and they added an underway replenishment capability. And this was huge because remember, they were limited to 3,000 nautical miles before they had to pull into a friendly port to refuel. They did not do at-sea refueling until Hull 8 was upgraded in 1980, and then Hull 9, Hull 10, and so forth. Unfortunately, they did lose one of these in an at-sea refueling accident that suffered an explosion and had to subsequently be scrapped. So it was not safe to refuel at sea, but they were teaching themselves how to do it. So the Type 01D modernization to the Type 015DT happened in the early 90s. So we'll say right around 1990. So this is an additional improvement on these ships. They gave them a digital combat system. So now the radars are sharing information with a computer for the first time using circuit boards and integrated technology, including random access memory, 32K of it, to save target data, aim weapons, and provide fire control data from the sensors to the weapon systems. This was called the ZKG 4 Bravo. So this controlled the Type 342 fire control radar. You can see that they're on top of the superstructure forward there. They also had a low frequency, high power sonar called the SJD-1. NATO name was Stag Hoof, and it had a range of about 6 miles. The Type 393 surface search radar is on the big A-frame tower there, looking around. And for the first time, they put surface-to-air missiles to help with the defense of this ship. So they had the HQ-7 SAM on board. And the anti-ship missiles were upgraded in the 1990s to the YJ-82. This is a modern era cruise missile, anti-ship cruise missile. Subsonic, as we'll go over here in a second. But first, let's talk about the SAM. The SAM is a very interesting design. This is one of the few things that China completely invented on their own, and it kind of shows because nobody else does it like this. This is a bit bonkers to me, but China does what China does, I guess. So this turret that's on the bow here of the ships that are converted to the Delta Tango, the 051DT, have an 8 SAM turret launcher on the bow. And their reloads are kept below decks in this box storage that can elevate itself up at an angle, as you see here in this picture, and then they can be manually loaded with crew members. Now, I can't imagine them doing this during a fight, but they could do it at sea, which means they could do it in the middle of an engagement. But the crew member's topside would be completely exposed to any kind of fire. But this is how they did it. So they have 8 SAMs in the turret underway with 12 reloads carried in this big box magazine that's elevated up and down from below decks. This SAM has a range of 12 kilometers. And here is the YJ-82, also known as the C-802. There's a couple different variants of this missile, but we're just going to talk about the basics here. This is a medium-range anti-ship missile. It goes for 120 kilometers, and it is subsonic, 0.9 Mach. It is sea skimming, so very, very modern. You know, it has its little altimeter, radar altimeter to keep it above the waves. It's got a couple different modes where it can go, you know, very close to the waves during a calm sea state, or they can set it to more of a medium height, where it's, you know, a few meters off the waves. That way a wave doesn't slap it out of the air. It does have a high explosive fragmentation warhead. It is radar active homing, and the pulse is monopulse. So it's like a single ping, right? But this ping is happening at 10 to 20 gigahertz. And so that's the area that if you're being shot at and this missile's tracking your ship, your ESM is going to be seeing a spike of 10 to 20 gigahertz in repeated monopulses over and over again. That will become shorter and shorter. It's called range gating. So you don't want to see that, because that means you got one of these missiles coming at you. All right, a Type 051 modernized to the Type 051Z. There are only 2 hulls that did this, and this was called the command ships. They enlarged the superstructure up front. You can see there they put a little like a bridge house on top of it, and the superstructure itself is a little bit wider at the top. They installed the ZKJ-1 combat data system, which is an improved data system. And the idea here is she's going to have long-range air search capability, detect those targets, a long ways out, and be able to feed that information to the fleet. And so in order to handle those communications, she needs this combat data system. The 56 millimeter AA guns replaced the smaller 37 millimeter AA guns, so a little heavier air defense, but it's not any more capable, honestly. It's just a larger round. The Type 381 Rice Shield 3D air search radar. Rice Shield is what the name the NATO gives it. There was another one called Rice Screen or something like that, but just know that Rice Shield is the original name. And there was only 2 ships made like this. 2 of the 17 they modified into this one. All right, the Luda II. So the Luda II was made, or modified rather, in 1987. They only made one of these, and it's the Jinan. And what they did is they removed the aft turrets, so the anti-air turret, that 37 millimeter turret, they removed it, and the gun as well, the main gun, and replaced it with a helicopter hangar, landing pad, and landing pad. So they could operate 2 helicopters off of this, and they did operate the Harbin Z9 Charlie helicopters. Now, one of the reasons why they did this is they needed improved ASW capability, because the sonar systems that were mounted on the hull of this thing were greatly compromised by the steam power plants. The boilers were extremely noisy, would shake and vibrate the entire ship every time that they were running, whether it was high speed, low speed. There was always a certain amount of vibration shaking the hull. And that led to any hull-mounted sonar system being very ineffective, especially in any kind of passive mode. It literally couldn't see or hear anything. So in order to address this, instead of designing a new ship like they would eventually, a quick fix was to, give the ship an ASW helicopter, give it 2 of them in a hangar. And so they tried it, and because it significantly decreased the amount of firepower the destroyer had, it just wasn't a good compromise. So they just did this for one, tested it out, operated it for years, but it's one of one. That was the Luda II. So this is the Dolphin helicopter that was operating off of it. Came into service in 1990. Has a max speed of 300 kilometers per hour. It does have a couple really good sensors. First is a forward-looking infrared. This is based on a French design. And an X-band surface search radar. X-bands tend to be very accurate. So it could get very specific, as long as it was within range of the radar, they had a very good bearing and to the contact. And they also introduced dipping sonar. This is the first time the Chinese are really employing dipping sonar from their destroyers here. So the helicopter can identify and localize a submerged target, and then the ship can get into position to attack it with the RBU or its own torpedoes. And they did put 2 light torpedoes on these Dolphin helicopters. And they were based off of, we found out, the Mark 46 American torpedo. So somehow they got their hands on either technical drawings or maybe they found one through means and basically copied the American Type 46 torpedo and put it on their helicopters in the 1990s. And they still have that technology today. So this helicopter does not carry anti-ship missiles, but its X-band surface search radar can feed fire control data back to the ship, who can then attack it with its C-802 missiles. All right, so Type 051 Gulf and Gulf II. Gulf what? Gulf II. These are the last 2 Ludas that they built. This is Hull 16 and Hull 17. This is the end of the class. After this, they're going to design a new ship, learning all the lessons that they learned from the Luda, and make a better destroyer. But let's talk about these 2 first. So they installed the Type 354 3D air and surface search radar on these. So these are very similar to the command vessels, but they have 4 twin YJ-8 launchers, greatly increasing the number of anti-ship cruise missiles that they could carry. They copied or licensed, it's really not clear here, but somehow they got their hands on the French sonar systems, the Dub V23 and 43, a hull sonar, and a VDS, a variable depth sonar. So remember what I said about the boilers masking the hull-mounted sonar, making it practically useless? Well, the variable depth sonar, because they tow it behind them, very similar to a towed array. I guess literally it would be a towed array. It didn't suffer as much from that noise. Now, even though it was close to the ship, and obviously on ships noise was still kind of blanking out one bearing for the VDS was farther away and not physically mounted on the same hull as those boilers, so it was more effective. So that was a big improvement using the French Dub V43 VDS. The combat system is upgraded. It's a ZKG-4 Alpha Bravo system. Alpha was on type 051 Gulf 1. The ZKG-4 Bravo, slightly improved, was on the type 051 G2. Okay, so 051 G1 is hull 16. Type 051 G2 is hull 17. Literally two different combat systems, but I lumped them together here because together they're called Luda III. So Luda II had the helicopter, one of one. Luda III was only two hulls with improved offensive capability and a better sonar system because it had the towed array sonar system. The anti-air guns are gone from 37 millimeter to 40 millimeter, and they are of Italian origin. And again, it's unclear if they licensed them from the Italians or just copied them. The sources are conflicting on that, so who knows? Just know that they are the Italian 40 millimeter AA guns. So from Luda III to Luda IV, this is hull 16 and 17 again, they doubled the amount of quad launchers that they had. So it's 4 quad launchers now of the Eagle 83. It's an improved YJ-83 missile, anti-ship missile. This one can do 180 kilometer range, subsonic 0.9 Mach, anti-ship cruise missile. It is semi-armor piercing fused with an HE frag explosion. And they have the 8 HHQ-7 SAMs. And that's not a typo. It's called HHQ. So that's what we went with. NATO designation is CSA. That's China Surface to Air Naval Missile 4. Has a 12 kilometer range. So, and that has been on hulls since hull 8. So that's really not that new. What is new is they doubled essentially the number of surface to surface missiles, and they slightly improved them as well. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the Luda. This is the beginning of our journey through the Chinese Navy. I'll say this. I'm really impressed with the Chinese engineering ability to reverse engineer other people's designs. I know there's a lot of issues with that morally, but whenever you look at the position that China was in, recovering from a nasty civil war that never really officially ended, but they had mainland China and you had Taiwan, and this is all mainland China that we're talking about now. They were in a bit of a mess politically and socially. They were starting essentially a new country and a new culture in a country that had thousands of years of history. And with that, they had a lot of brain drain. A lot of the very rich and smart professors went to Taiwan. They escaped the communist revolution essentially. So you had a lot of low level workers and some engineers, and some of them were brilliant, to be honest, but there just weren't many of them. So they had to reverse engineer everything they could get from the Soviets until finally, Mao Zedong had called it quits with the Soviets over political issues. So they're able to create this ship, this Luda, with literally no technical assistance besides the first couple years when things were just getting started. But after that, they essentially created a modern destroyer on their own. So, I mean, that's something to be commended. I'm not aware of any other country that has done that. Most other countries, take America, for example, we've just built better ships year after year after year, kind of working our way up. And these guys are starting in the middle of a technology revolution where, integrated circuits are becoming a thing, and circuit boards and computers. And they're very early days in the 1960s and 70s. And they're trying to, jump on board and be one of the boys that has this type of technology. And they pulled it off. Granted, they had to copy a lot of stuff. They copied everyone's homework, but in the end, they were able to turn in their homework. And that's where they stand now. So, moral ambiguity aside, they did a good job. They did modification improvements. Unlike the Americans, they do not wait for the next class to come along for any major changes. They're willing to take a Luda and make it a Luda II, a Luda III, and a Luda IV. You know, just as soon as they need to. They literally took a Luda III and made it a Luda IV there at the end, if you noticed. I mean, the same ship. Boilers were always a limiting factor. They never got around to changing that because whenever you change a prime mover, like a main engine, you are essentially building a new class of ship when you do that. Part of the definition of a ship is what is its prime mover. And when that changes, it's a new class of ship. So they never did that. Plus, it's, you know, nearly impossible to do that without reconstructing the ship because the heart of the ship is its prime mover. The brain and, you know, everything else is the combat control system, of course, and the crew. But whenever you're pulling out the boiler, it's like pulling out the heart and putting in something new. And no matter what variant of Luda we're talking about, the hull-mounted sensors were essentially useless. They did have a 6-mile range, but that was with active transmission, and you had to have a good, strong return to even hear the active return out to 6 miles. So, but like I said, the Chinese did a good job starting with almost nothing and creating a modern destroyer. They created 17 of them, and they improved them 6 times. So 6 total variants if you count the original design. All right, well, that's it. Thank you very much, Patreons. I appreciate you supporting me. We have the same group here. As always, these guys are very consistent, and I appreciate that.